Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today we are unpacking a short but honestly a profoundly insightful piece of writing that explores something completely invisible. And it's something completely free, yet, it's something that makes almost everyone immediately uncomfortable. We're talking about silence.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate behavioral paradox of our time, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to figure out why. Why is something universally described as peaceful often so deeply unsettling in practice?
Right, because if you survey people, almost everyone will claim they want more peace and quiet.
Oh, absolutely.
We treat it like this luxury commodity, yet when we are actually handed an unadulterated block of it, our immediate physical and psychological response is to escape it.
We just don't know what to do with the absence of input.
Yeah.
So to set the scene here, the author paints this really vivid picture. Imagine sitting in a perfectly empty room.
Okay.
You close this heavy wooden door behind you. The windows are shut tight, sealed against the street level. There's no television, no phone in your pocket.
Sounds pretty rare these days.
Yeah, right? And no hum from an air conditioning unit.
Yeah.
It's a standard physical room. You sit down in a chair and you wait.
And for the first few seconds, it probably feels like a relief.
Exactly. But then, according to the text, the space begins to change. The silence stops being empty. It actually becomes heavy.
It becomes loud.
Yes. You start hearing the ticking of a wall clock that you absolutely swear was not ticking a minute ago.
Right.
You begin to hear the wet, rhythmic sound of your own breathing. You pick up on the faint creak of distant floorboards from 2 stories above you.
Your brain is essentially going into overdrive.
Yeah, your heart starts to beat a little faster.
Right.
You shift in your chair, and the rustle of your own clothing sounds like a gunshot. Without any jagged lines on an X-ray, without any physical threat in the room, you are suddenly, visibly, and deeply uncomfortable.
And what we're looking at there isn't just the absence of noise. We are looking at the actual architecture of human attention.
Right. What happens to the brain when the auditory camouflage we rely on is suddenly stripped away?
Yes, and auditory camouflage is the exact right framework for this. To understand why that empty room feels so oppressive, we have to look at how the brain processes sound.
Okay, wait in on us.
So it's through something called the reticular activating system, or the RAS. In a typical modern environment, your brain is just drowning in macro stimuli.
Like traffic noise, background chatter, stuff like that.
Exactly. The hum of appliances, a podcast playing in your ear. The RAS acts as a bouncer for your conscious mind.
Oh, I like that. A bouncer.
Yeah, it filters out the vast majority of that constant, non-threatening noise so you can focus on whatever task is at hand.
Right, because otherwise we would just be completely paralyzed by sensory overload.
Precisely. But when you walk into that perfectly quiet room and close the door, your brain doesn't just, turn off its sensory processing.
And it doesn't know you're just doing an experiment?
No, it doesn't know that you are safe in a room. It only knows that the environment has radically changed. So the brain recalibrates?
Meaning it starts looking for new signals.
Yes. It essentially turns the gain dial all the way up on your auditory cortex. It starts desperately searching the environment for microstimuli to latch onto, just to ensure there are no hidden threats.
Okay, so that ticking clock feels jarring because your brain has actively amplified it.
Exactly. You are experiencing the neurological equivalent of, reaching out in pitch darkness, trying to feel for the walls.
But wait, if the brain is just looking for the walls, looking for a baseline of safety, why do we actively avoid putting ourselves in that state?
That's the big question.
Right. Why do we need the camouflage at all? Because I want to look at the environment we've built, and the source touches on this. It seems specifically engineered to ensure the gain dial on our auditory cortex never actually has to go up.
If you look at the acoustic design of modern life, true quiet has been systematically eradicated. It's practically a structural impossibility now.
I mean, you walk into a grocery store, and there's a carefully curated pop playlist echoing through the aisles.
Always.
You get into an elevator, there's instrumental music, you sit in a waiting room, and there's a television bolted to the wall playing a 24-hour news cycle on a loop.
And usually with the volume just loud enough to be decipherable, but not quite loud enough to really listen to comfortably.
Right, and we have notifications filling our phones, bringing a constant stream of pings and haptics. Constant layered stimulation has just become our baseline normal.
And the shift in that baseline is the crucial variable here. Noise is no longer an event, it is the default state of our existence.
But I want to push back on this a little bit just to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
If the baseline has shifted, aren't our brains just doing exactly what evolutionary biology designed them to do.
Adapting to the environment.
Yeah, we adapt to the environment we are in. Maybe we actually prefer the background noise. Like, I use a white noise machine to fall asleep every night.
A lot of people do.
You turn on a fan, and after 5 minutes, your brain filters it out. You don't even hear the blade spinning.
You don't.
You only realize how incredibly loud the fan was the exact moment the power goes out and it stops. The sudden absence of the noise is what wakes you up and feels aggressive, not the noise itself.
That's a really good point.
So if I sleep better with the noise, how is the modern baseline actually a problem?
Well, it's a very common argument, but it conflates two entirely different neurological processes.
Okay, what are they?
Acoustic masking versus cognitive engagement.
Masking versus engagement. Got it.
When you turn on a white noise machine or a fan, you are providing a static, predictable frequency. Your brain's reticular activating system quickly identifies the fan as non-threatening and static, so it easily filters it out.
Okay.
The white noise is literally just a physical blanket. It covers up the unpredictable sounds, like a dog barking down the street that would otherwise spike your cortisol and wake you up.
Oh, I see. So the fan is really just a shield against other, more disruptive noises.
Right. But the noise of modern life, the looping videos, the podcasts, the music with lyrics, the television in the waiting room, that is not static.
Because it's constantly changing.
Exactly. It requires cognitive processing. Even if you are ignoring the television, your brain is processing the language, the changing light patterns, the emotional valence of the news anchor's voice.
That sounds exhausting when you put it like that.
It takes up active bandwidth in your working memory. We aren't just passively existing in a noisy world, we are actively consuming that noise to occupy our cognitive machinery.
Wow.
And that distinction leads to the crux of the issue described in the text. When that specific type of dynamic noise is removed, it isn't just the loss of a soundscape. It is the sudden freeing up of cognitive processing power.
A mass void opens up.
Exactly.
And what steps into that void? Because when you say cognitive machinery, it kind of implies we're putting our brains to work on processing external garbage specifically so they don't have the energy to process something else.
That is exactly what is happening. We use dynamic external stimulation to outrun our own internal monologue.
Outrun our own thoughts.
Yes. We are terrified of the void because of what lives inside it. When the active barrier of noise drops, the cognitive bandwidth is suddenly available, and hidden thoughts immediately begin to surface.
Hidden thoughts. That sounds deeply ominous, like we're all walking around suppressing these massive dark secrets.
Well, it doesn't have to be a dark secret.
Right. I don't think it's always that dramatic. It's just the reality of an uncomfortable mirror.
Yes, a mirror.
The source notes that while silence creates space for reflection, reflection itself is not always comfortable. Without the shield of a podcast or a playlist, quiet moments naturally amplify the things we just haven't dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
We start feeling worries about an upcoming presentation at work, or regrets about a conversation we had 3 days ago, or just a low-grade hum of loneliness.
The psychological term for these unresolved issues is open loops. It's heavily related to what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect, what is that exactly?
It's the human brain's really powerful tendency to remember and fixate on uncompleted or interrupted tasks far more than completed ones.
Oh, that makes so much sense. If I can interrupt with an analogy here, I feel like modern noise is kind of like running on a mental treadmill.
Okay, I can see that.
You put your headphones in, you crank up the speed to a 9.0, and you are just moving. Your focus is entirely on keeping your feet moving to the rhythm of the music.
Right, you're distracted by the effort.
Yeah. Silence is the moment you hit the big red emergency stop button. You step off the belt, and suddenly you feel how incredibly heavy and exhausted your legs actually are.
Yes.
The exhaustion was always there, accumulating in your muscles, but the momentum of the treadmill distracted you from feeling it. You didn't realize how tired you were until you stopped moving.
That physical momentum translates perfectly to cognitive momentum. It takes a tremendous amount of metabolic energy to suppress emotional processing. But let's look at what actually surfaces when you step off that treadmill. You mentioned worries, regrets, and loneliness.
Yeah, and this is where I genuinely get stuck with this concept.
How so?
If silence just creates an empty space, a blank canvas for the mind, why does the brain default to the heavy, exhausting things?
That's a fair question.
Why is the default state of the human mind apparently so miserable?
Mm.
Like, if I have a free moment of quiet, why doesn't my brain say, oh, wonderful peace and quiet, let's replay the memory of my favorite vacation in Italy?
Right.
Or let's think about how great my dog is. Why do we immediately dive straight into regrets and anxieties?
Because the brain is, fundamentally, a problem-solving engine designed for survival. It is not a highly paid entertainer designed for your comfort.
Wow. Okay. That's bleak, but it makes sense.
Let's go back to the Zeigarnik effect and open loops. A happy memory of a vacation in Italy is a closed loop. It's resolved.
It's done.
Exactly. It does not require any further action to ensure your survival or social standing, so your brain files it away. But the ambiguous text message you got from your boss 3 hours ago,
Oh, yeah. That's an open loop.
that is a massive open loop. It represents a potential threat to your livelihood, the argument you had with your partner where things were left unsaid. That threatens your social stability.
So the brain prioritizes the threats over the comforts.
Always. Evolutionarily, it has to. When you are blasting music or endlessly scrolling through short-form videos, you are jamming the signal. You are artificially occupying the brain's problem-solving machinery with external stimuli.
And the second you turn the noise off,
The brain returns to its primary function. It looks at the desk and says, all right, what work is unfinished? And it immediately surfaces the heaviest, most complicated emotional files you've been avoiding.
oof.
Silence forces a confrontation with whatever is lingering just beneath the surface. The discomfort of silence isn't actually about the acoustics of the room at all. It is entirely about the discomfort of self-awareness.
So sitting alone in a quiet room is basically forcing yourself into an unprompted, unguided therapy session.
Basically, yes.
No wonder people reflexively reach for their phones the second they sit on the couch. The phone is an escape hatch from the mirror. It's an anesthetic.
It is a highly effective, culturally normalized anesthetic, and because we use it so frequently, our tolerance for our own internal monologue has completely atrophied.
But this intolerance doesn't just happen when we are alone in our bedrooms staring at the ceiling.
No, not at all.
The internal discomfort we feel is fascinating. But the author points out it gets infinitely more complicated when we introduce other people. Because silence isn't just an internal mirror, it's also a social weapon, or at least it feels like one.
Yes.
So let's shift into the social weight of silence.
This is where the internal anxiety externalizes and becomes a very complex interpersonal dynamic.
Right. In conversations, long pauses often feel excruciatingly awkward. We are naturally social creatures, and we constantly search for connection and feedback.
We need.
When we're speaking to someone and we're suddenly met with silence, we don't usually interpret it neutrally. We interpret it emotionally. We immediately start sweating, worrying that the other person is upset, that they're judging us, that they're bored, or emotionally withdrawing.
To understand why a simple pause in sound triggers such a massive psychological response, you have to look at the mechanics of human conversation. Conversation is not just an exchange of data.
Right. It's not just uploading a file.
No, it is a complex rhythm of continuous social validation. It's a game of pitch and catch. Even when we are not the one speaking, we are constantly broadcasting feedback.
We nod our heads, we make eye contact, we offer those little affirmative sounds like, right.
Yeah, exactly.
We call those back channel cues. They are the microsignals that tell the speaker, I hear you, I am with you, you are safe in this interaction.
We rely on that continuous feedback loop to feel secure in our social standing. When the rhythm breaks, when you finish a sentence and the other person just stares at you in silence for 4, 5, 6 seconds, you are suddenly deprived of all validation data.
The feedback loop is severed.
Yes.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise again. Is silence always a sign of a severed loop?
What do you mean?
Well, what about the concept of comfortable silence?
Yeah?
Isn't the ability to sit in silence with someone actually the ultimate hallmark of a profound, secure relationship?
That's a great point.
If you're on a 6-hour road trip with your absolute best friend or your spouse of 10 years, you don't have to talk the entire time. You can go an hour without saying a word, just watching the trees go by.
Yeah.
And it feels wonderful. It feels connective. So why is our knee-jerk reaction to a pause to assume danger or boredom when silence can clearly be so positive?
Because the vital distinction between psychological certainty and psychological uncertainty. You are absolutely right that comfortable silence exists, but look at the prerequisite for it.
The trust.
Exactly. It only exists when psychological certainty has already been firmly established. With a spouse of 10 years, you have a massive historical reservoir of trust. The feedback loop doesn't need to be maintained every single second because the foundation is entirely secure.
Right.
Your brain predicts safety based on a decade of data. But let's look at what happens when that certainty isn't absolute.
Right, like sitting across from someone on a first date,
Yes.
or being in a one-on-one performance review with your boss, or even just talking to an acquaintance at a dinner party.
In those scenarios, the foundational trust isn't there yet. You are operating in a state of psychological uncertainty. So when the back channel cues stop and the silence stretches out, your brain's predictive coding goes into overdrive.
Because it doesn't have the data to guarantee safety.
Precisely. Evolutionarily speaking, human survival depended entirely on group cohesion. If you were a hunter-gatherer on the savannah and the rest of the tribe suddenly stopped responding to you, stopped acknowledging you, or turned their backs on you, that wasn't just socially awkward.
That was a death sentence.
Exactly. Banishment meant starvation or predation.
So our brains treat a 4-second pause at a dinner party like we're about to be exiled into the wilderness to be eaten by wolves.
The amygdala certainly does. The scale of the threat has changed, but the biological alarm system has not. When the feedback loop is cut, the silence becomes a massive gaping hole of ambiguity.
And the human brain despises ambiguity.
It hates it. It will do anything to resolve it.
Yeah.
So what do? We project our own deepest insecurities into that silent gap.
We fill the blank canvas with our own worst fears. If I'm internally worried that I'm not smart enough to be in a certain room, and I make a point and the room goes silent, my brain doesn't think, oh, they are deeply pondering my brilliant insight.
No, it never does.
My brain immediately says, see, you sound like an idiot. They all judging you. You don't belong here.
Exactly. You are reading your own internal script into their silence. And this is a brilliant defense mechanism in a twisted way.
How is that brilliant? It feels terrible.
Well, because dealing with a concrete negative emotion, deciding that they hate me or they are mad at me, is actually easier for the brain to process than the absolute terrifying uncertainty of nothingness.
Oh, wow.
You invent a conflict because a conflict is a known variable that you can try to solve. Ambiguity cannot be solved.
That is wild.
Yeah.
We would rather assume someone is furiously angry with us than just sit with the ambiguity of a quiet pause. We literally invent ghosts just so we have something to fight.
Oh, do.
So if we look at the scorecard here, silence causes acute internal anxiety when we are alone because it forces us to look at our unresolved flaws, and it causes sheer social panic when we are with others because we project our insecurities into the void.
That's the summary. Yes.
Given all that, shouldn't the logical conclusion be to just keep the music playing?
Yeah.
I mean, if silence hurts this much, why shouldn't we just ensure we are always talking, the TD is always on, and the AirPods are always in?
Because treating silence as a disease to be cured by noise is a fundamental misdiagnosis. The discomfort we feel isn't a symptom of silence being toxic. The discomfort is a symptom of withdrawal.
Withdrawal from the anesthetic.
Precisely. If we move from diagnosing the problem to looking at the actual utility of quiet, we have to undergo a profound reframing.
Yeah.
We have to reframe silence from a threat to a therapy.
The source text explicitly states that silence is not inherently negative, right?
Right. In fact, our intense visceral discomfort simply reveals how rarely we allow ourselves to exist without external stimulation. We have lost the physiological ability to downregulate.
How rarely we allow ourselves to exist. That is a really sharp indictment of the way we live.
It is, but it also points to a mechanical reality. Silence slows the mind down enough for deeper emotions and profound thoughts to emerge, but that slowing down process is rarely smooth.
I want to ground this in a shared experience. I want you, the listener, to think about the last time a severe storm rolled through and the power went out at your house at night.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
You're sitting there, maybe you're watching a movie, the lights are on, the dishwasher's humming in the kitchen, the HVAC system is blowing air, and then snap. Absolute darkness.
The instantaneous lack of sound is staggering.
It really is.
Mhm.
At first, the silence is genuinely deafening. It feels thick, it's jarring, and maybe even a little panic-inducing. You're hyper-aware of the dark and the quiet. You feel your pulse in your neck. But if you don't immediately grab your phone to stream a video, if you just light a candle and sit at the kitchen table for an hour, the texture of the room begins to change. Doesn't it start to feel strangely, deeply calming?
That power outage scenario perfectly illustrates the biological adaptation phase mentioned in the text. What you just described is the exact neurological journey from sympathetic nervous system arousal to parasympathetic rest.
Let's break down those phases, because I think understanding the timeline is the only way people will ever be able to endure it. Phase 1 is the snap.
Phase 1 is the alarm. The auditory camouflage is ripped away. The environment has abruptly changed, so your reticular activating system floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol. The brain screams, "Pay attention, something is wrong."
That's the panic. You feel the ticking clock.
Exactly.
And phase two is the void, where the heavy thoughts rush in.
Right. You are sitting at the dark table, and because you can't watch a movie, your default mode network kicks in. Suddenly, you are thinking about your credit card bill, or your aging parents, or a mistake you made at work.
This is the friction. The cognitive treadmill has stopped, and you are feeling the exhaustion.
Yes.
I think of it like the dust settling in a snow globe. When the noise of modern life is shaking you up, everything is frantic, the snow is everywhere. When you finally stop moving, at first the snow is still swirling violently, it looks chaotic, it feels overwhelming.
That's a great visual, but if you can endure that initial wave of swirling snow, if you don't panic and reach for the phone to start shaking the globe again, you enter phase 3, the settling.
What happens then?
The mind actually exhausts its immediate supply of panic. The unresolved loops get acknowledged, and once they are acknowledged, the brain stops screaming about them. The sympathetic nervous system disengages, and the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode, takes over.
So the snow settles to the bottom, and the water becomes perfectly clear.
Yes. The silence shifts from being a threatening, oppressive void to becoming a supportive, calming presence. It is a mandatory biological and psychological transition. You cannot access the clarity without surviving the swirling snow.
If we just check our phones.
If we constantly shake the snow globe the absolute second the snow starts to settle, by checking social media or turning on the TV, we trap ourselves in a perpetual state of cognitive chaos. We never achieve clarity.
So the discomfort isn't a warning sign that silence is bad. The discomfort is just the friction of the mind slowing down. It's the brakes squealing as the car comes to a halt.
Beautifully put.
But even if we understand this internally, I think the physical environment plays a massive role in whether we can successfully navigate that friction.
How so?
Because sitting in a dark kitchen or an empty apartment still feels somewhat restrictive. To really understand what calming silence feels like in its most optimized state, the author points out we have to look outside of our constructed boxes. We have to look at the natural world.
Where the quality and texture of the quiet is entirely fundamentally different.
Exactly.
This is one of the most vital distinctions we can make, and it completely shifts the paradigm of acoustic ecology. We have to separate the concept of silence into different environmental categories, because the silence of an empty room is not the same physical or psychological phenomenon as the silence of a forest.
We're talking about the alive silence of nature versus emotionally isolated silence. If you picture sitting on a large rock near a mountain lake, or deep in a dense pine forest, or even just out in a wide open desert,
Yeah.
in those environments, the silence rarely, if ever, feels empty. It doesn't feel like a void waiting to attack you. It feels alive and spacious. It feels expansive.
It does.
And to me, this suggests that the root of our modern psychological problem isn't the phenomenon of silence itself. The human animal is not allergic to quiet. We are just allergic to the kind of artificial, sterile silence we experience in modern indoor isolation.
That phrase, alive and spacious, points directly to the concept of acoustic space. Natural silence has a distinct texture. It has volume, but not volume in the auditory sense of decibels. It has volume in the architectural sense of capacity.
I have always conceptualized it this way. Nature's silence is like standing alone in the center of a massive, ancient, airy cathedral.
Oh, I like that.
You can breathe deeply, the air moves around you, you can hear the sheer scale of the room. You feel very small, but in a way that is comforting, not threatening. Your smallness makes your problems feel small too. On the other hand, the silence of an empty, modern, drywall apartment with the deadbolt locked, the double-paned windows shut, and the blinds drawn, that feels more like being trapped inside an airless closet.
Right.
It isn't expansive, it is violently oppressive. It bounces your own thoughts right back into your face.
The science behind your cathedral versus closet analogy is rooted in attention restoration theory, or ART-T. Developed by environmental psychologists, ART-T suggests that natural environments engage us in something called soft fascination.
Soft fascination. I love that term. What does that mean neurologically?
Well, in an urban environment or when interacting with screens, our brains are subjected to hard fascination. We are forced to direct our attention forcefully to avoid getting hit by a car, or to process a rapid-fire video, or to decipher complex social cues in a crowded room.
Which takes a lot of effort.
Yes. This depletes our directed attention capacity. It burns glucose. It exhausts the brain.
That's the mental treadmill again.
Exactly. But in a natural environment, the stimuli are inherently non-demanding. The rustle of wind through pine needles, the gentle lapping of water on a lakeshore, the visual pattern of clouds moving.
Right, you notice them, but you don't have to work to understand them.
Yes, these elements capture our attention effortlessly. They don't require cognitive processing to decode. This is soft fascination. It allows the directed attention centers of the brain to rest and replenish while still providing just enough sensory input to keep the reticular activating system from panicking and searching for threats.
So nature provides the perfect balance. It isn't an anechoic chamber of dead, terrifying silence, but it also isn't a barrage of demanding data. It is a supportive acoustic container.
Yes. In nature, the environment accommodates your reflection without making it feel heavy. The burden of the silence isn't entirely on your shoulders. You are sharing the silence with the trees, the topography, the ecosystem.
You realize you're just one small biological component quietly existing alongside millions of other biological components.
Precisely. We have hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary familiarity with natural environments. Our nervous systems recognize the ambient soundscape of a forest as a signal of ultimate safety.
Which proves a fundamental point. Humans are entirely capable of enjoying silence, craving it, and utilizing it for profound emotional restoration when the context is right.
Absolutely.
The tragedy of modern design is that indoor artificial silence strips away that supportive natural context, replacing it with sterile walls that offer no soft fascination. It leaves us feeling trapped in the closet, emotionally isolated, with nothing to look at but our own uncompleted tasks.
It's a profound shift in how we inhabit spaces.
Okay, this brings us to the ultimate practical crossroads of this deep dive. We know that good, supportive, expansive silence exists out there in the world. We know that escaping into the constant noise of our phones and TVs only suppresses our emotional reality and exhausts our cognitive bandwidth.
Right.
But we also can't all just quit our jobs, abandon society, and move to a remote cabin in the woods to sit by a lake every day.
As nice as that sounds.
We live in cities, we have commutes, we live in apartments with drywall. So if we are trapped in the modern world, how do we bring that expansive feeling into our everyday lives?
This requires us to view engaging with silence not as a luxury, but as an essential, practiced modern skill.
And that is a huge paradigm shift. We usually think of skills as active things, like learning to code, learning a new language, getting better at public speaking.
Sure.
We don't think of doing absolutely nothing as a skill that requires training. But the author's final argument is that learning to sit with quiet might actually be the most important emotional regulation tool we can develop in the 21st century.
I would agree with that entirely.
By intentionally sitting in silence, we begin to finally hear the world around us with clarity, and more importantly, we begin to hear ourselves without the distortion of the algorithm. So, practically speaking, how do we build this muscle? If our default state is the shield of noise and our tolerance for quiet has completely atrophied, how do we learn to lower the shield without getting immediately crushed by that first wave of worry, regret, and the ticking clock?
If we synthesize everything we've discussed, the neurology, the open loops, the social weight, and the phases of adaptation, the answer lies entirely in intentionality and exposure.
Exposure, like exposure therapy.
Exactly. Because we live in an era of unprecedented engineered distraction, finding quiet is no longer a natural occurrence. It will not just happen to you by accident unless the power grid fails.
Right.
Therefore, it must become a deliberate, scheduled practice. You have to treat it like physical therapy for your attention span.
You have to voluntarily walk over and turn the white noise machine off.
Ah.
You have to unplug the fan.
You have to choose it. And crucially, you have to mentally prepare for the friction. Building the muscle means entering the quiet room knowing exactly what is going to happen.
You have to anticipate that the first 5 minutes will be unpleasant.
Highly unpleasant. The clock will tick loudly. The phantom anxieties will flare up. You will remember an embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago. Your brain will scream at you to check your email.
You have to know that the snow globe is going to swirl, and you have to commit to not shaking it.
Exactly. It is essentially microdosing exposure therapy for your own internal monologue. You start small, 2 minutes, then 5 minutes.
And you just sit there.
You sit there, and when the heavy thought arises, you don't fight it, and you don't run from it by turning on a podcast. You just observe it. You let the brain process the open loop.
And what happens?
What you will find consistently is that the thought cannot hurt you. The anxiety spikes, peaks, and then begins to dissipate. The parasympathetic system engages, the snow settles.
It really comes down to taking back control of your own internal narrative. Right now, we let the external world dictate our cognitive state. We let an algorithm decide what emotions we are going to feel based on the next video in the feed.
That's a very real danger.
By sitting in silence, you sever that external control. You finally let your own brain sort through its own filing cabinets. You clean out the backlog of emotional data.
You transition from being a passive victim of your environment to an active participant in your own mind. You stop using noise as an escape hatch, and you start using silence as a diagnostic tool.
That's a great way to put it.
It connects you authentically with your physical environment, and it restores your capacity for genuine, unpanicked connection with yourself and with others.
If you can survive your own silence, sitting in comfortable silence with someone else stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a shared sanctuary.
Precisely. It is a profound shift in perspective. You move from a state of horror, vacued the fear of empty space, to a deep appreciation of the capacity that space provides.
It really is a superpower in a noisy world. We've gone on quite a journey today. We started by examining the jarring, almost physically threatening sensation of the ticking clock in a perfectly quiet room. We explored the architecture of modern life and how we use a massive shield of constant dynamic stimulation to keep our cognitive bandwidth entirely occupied.
We covered a lot.
We broke down how that noise prevents us from looking into the uncomfortable mirror of our own unresolved open loops, and how the absence of noise in social situations triggers evolutionary panic alarms. But we also traveled out to the mountains and the lakes to discover the concept of soft fascination, realizing that silence isn't inherently an empty void. It is an alive, spacious, and deeply restorative ecosystem if we can just learn to endure the initial friction of slowing down.
The friction is the price of admission to clarity.
It is a price worth paying. And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to ponder, a practical challenge as you go about the rest of your day. The next time you get into your car to drive to the grocery store, or the next time you walk into an empty room in your house to fold laundry, try leaving the music, the radio, and the podcasts off for just 5 minutes.
Just 5 minutes?
Just give yourself 5 deliberate minutes of unshielded time. And when the quiet settles in, when the auditory camouflage drops away, pay very close attention to the very first thought that rises to the surface. Don't push it away. Look at it. And ask yourself, is it the silent room that makes you uncomfortable, or is it what you just brought into it? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you find a moment of true, expansive quiet today.